Hello, algebra students. We are going to talk through some of the answers on the 1.2 quiz today. Now, before we talk solutions, each problem will be looking for a few key items. So in the directions, it says to define a variable, and then we're looking for either an equation or an inequality for the situation, and then of course the actual solution. Okay, so for each problem, those three main things will be needed. So let's jump in. Example 1. The question is asking how many products does Chip need to sell? So notice right here, I set up my variable as the number of products. And then my actual equation is going to start with 800 because that's his base salary, and we are adding 60x because that's $60 per product, and his goal is to earn $8,000. So I set that equal to 8,000. So we're looking for that main equation, and then obviously when we solve, we get an answer of 120. Now, since it is an equation, we can keep that 120. We don't have to worry about any fancy rounding. So final answer, and we're using some words to describe what that 120 means. It's 120 products. Now, example 2 is asking the minimum number of months for Sarah's hair to grow a certain length. So notice I set my variable as number of months based on that question. And then over here in my inequality, I started with the 50 because that is her starting length of her hair, 50 centimeters long. And then we also have the knowledge that her hair grows at 1.2 centimeters per month. So notice I added on 1.2 times x. Now because she wants her hair to grow, so it's at least 60 centimeters. So that's why I chose, with the word at least, I chose a greater than or equal to 60. So we want to make sure we have that inequality, and the big thing here is that inequality sign, greater than or equal, because they used that word right here, at least 60. So now our solution comes out to be x is greater than or equal to 8 1/3 or 8.3 repeating. But again, what does that actually mean for our scenario? Because remember, x was the number of months. So we're going to need to, because of this greater than or equal sign, we're going to need to round up. And then notice we had a final answer. We're looking for 9 months then, rounding up. All right, the third question here is talking about renting a canoe, and they're asking about how many hours can you afford to rent that canoe. So we're going to start off by defining that variable, and I used x for number of hours. So make sure you're setting that variable, whatever letter you use. Now over here at my inequality, I started with the 45 because we are renting a canoe for $45 plus, so I added on 20, but not just a 20, but a 20x because it's $20 per hour. Now notice it says we don't want to spend more than $150, so I chose the inequality less than or equal to 150. So in your inequality, make sure you have that less than or equal sign. So we don't want to go over 150, so as long as our expenditure comes in under or exactly equal to 150, we're in good shape. And then a little bit of solving will give me this x is less than or equal to 5.25. Now what does that x really mean? Well, that's number of hours, and we're renting by the hour, so I don't want to keep that 5.25. I want to let this symbol, less than or equal, guide me to round down. So notice my final answer is just 5 hours to rent that canoe. Okay, so make sure you're actually stating what that answer means. It's 5 hours, so put a label on it. All right, so those first three problems are pretty straightforward, pretty basic. Those would be, if I were grading, what I would use to help determine is a student in the beginning, developing, or the proficient level. Okay, so let's kind of review that terminology here, and then I'll talk about that last category in a second. But proficient, so let's kind of run through. It says, I can demonstrate the standard with proficient skill and understanding in consistent ways. So consistent would mean that you were defining the variable consistently in all three problems. You were setting up an equation or an inequality correctly in all three problems. And then you were answering the question, even using the correct rounding when needed, consistently in those first three problems. Okay, if you weren't quite consistent and you had some of those pieces, but maybe not all of it, that would be where a level 2 would come into play with the partial understanding. So maybe you were doing a good job at one or two of those things. Maybe it was defining the variable or setting up the equation or inequality, but maybe you were still a little shaky about the rounding or didn't quite get all those pieces right. So that would fall into that developing category. Okay. And then a beginning category, you're looking for more of this limited understanding. So that would be if you were missing several of those main key pieces I was talking about. So maybe you were missing the defining a variable, you were missing the correct inequality or equal sign on your equation or inequality setup, or maybe even in the solving, you were getting an incorrect answer. That would be a good indication for that beginning level here. So at this point, I want you to think about those first three problems and kind of help decide using the rubric, that 1, 2, or 3, beginning, developing, or proficient. Now, if you aced those first three problems and you were showing that proficient, consistent, all three pieces throughout the problem, here's where we're going to look at your problem 4 and see, can you make the jump into this mastery level here? And the big thing with mastery, what we're looking for is the understanding in unique and challenging ways. So this fourth problem definitely shows that unique and challenging way. So only if you've aced the first three problems, where we'll look at your problem 4. If you were really kind of shaky in the beginning or developing in your first three problems, you're at that 1 or 2. You're most likely not quite ready for that level 4, and can pause the video and give yourself that score right away. But if you aced all three, we're going to go on and look at that final question 4. So here's question 4, and they're asking about possible values for Shay's number. So notice I'm starting right here, defining my variable for Shay's number. Okay, now this definitely is a level 4 kind of top-notch problem because it ends up being a compound inequality. So you can write this in one of two ways. So notice I have an option 1 and an option 2 on the screen. So you could write your inequality combined. Okay, it is an and problem, so you could write it comboed together, or you could write it as option 2 has it, two separate inequalities with that word and in the middle. So if I go through, it says Shay's thinking of a number, and the sum of the number and 10 must be more than 15. So that shows that's this first part. The sum means adding, so x and 10, and it has to be more than. So notice we use this greater than sign, greater than 15. And at the same time, up here it says it has to be less than 22. So that's this second inequality where we have x plus 10 is less than 22. Okay, so two different things happening. Our x plus 10 is bigger than 15, and our x plus 10 is less than 22. So when we go ahead and solve it, we get our first answer right here. X is greater than 5, and then our second answer, less than 12. So what that means is the number that Shay's thinking of is somewhere between 5 and 12, right? Bigger than 5, smaller than 12, so somewhere in between. So we're looking for that final answer here. Hopefully you didn't just stop with the x is greater than and x is less than answer. Hopefully you actually answered the question, talking about Shay's number being between 5 and 12 here, because that's the overlap. So if you got this level 4 question correct along with the first three, that would put you at a solid 4, kind of that advanced mastery level. If you didn't quite get this level 4 question, but you were close, but you rocked the first three, that is still a proficient. This I know was a challenging problem, and that's kind of the purpose to sort of differentiate between that level 3 and 4. So nice job if you got this problem. And even if you got close and you're kind of on the right track, that's a really good sign for your understanding.